Hello, and welcome back to Heaven Official's Blessing. Let me, just that a little bit. No. How did you get so off? That's good enough. Alright. Why am I still wearing these? I don't need these right now. Just changing some settings and things while we get started. And while we wait for folks to jump in, I'm gonna put my lozenge in. Alright. Hello, Odd Molly. Hey, Jessica. Welcome. I hope y'all like the new setup. I've been trying to change up how I do readings for both this and Silmarillion, kind of personalizing them to whatever project we're reading. I've tried to set up some hotkeys and things that'll let me do it. Oh, damn it. Why are you doing this? That's better. It was playing two music at the same time. I'm very sorry. I have it set up so I can change music to fit the tone and some images and stuff, but we'll see how well that works today. So let me know if anything sounds weird or isn't working well. All the artwork is from the official, either the manhwa or donghua, which is the anime or the manga. The anime is not aired yet, I don't believe. I don't think it comes out until later this year. But the manhwa is ongoing, and the art's lovely. Give it a few minutes to see who pops in. See if my... Oh, good. My announcement went live. Hello. Did you come to enjoy the story? Kitty says, I want to enjoy story. I am just a little cat. Here to enjoy story. He's so small. Come here. Let me hold you. Oh, there's a boy. No, don't go. Why won't you let me hold you? It's heartbreaking. I'm so sad. Alright. Okay. Alright. I think I've changed everything, set up everything. We should be good to go. See how well this goes today. Let's get rid of that. I don't need this right now. Hey, Phil! Go grab a cup of hot cocoa. That sounds good. Let me get my document and my little cheat sheet that tells me what button does what. Let me make sure I didn't accidentally... Yeah, I did it again, damn it. I am gonna have to find better hotkeys. Because just typing on the keyboard, it changed all the stuff, damn it. So, I'm gonna have to figure out a better way to do this. Oh boy, this is gonna be fun. Thanks again for joining us. Last time, our group had, we had four characters. Shi Lian, our main hero. The God of Bad Luck. Hua Chang, the paramour, the mysterious paramour, who everyone thinks is so dangerous and Shi Lian thinks is just a sweet guy. His two assistants, the little demigods that help him out, Nan Fang and Fu Yao, little demigods. One's kind of the jock and the other's kind of the nerd. I actually brought up some pictures this time since I wanted to help folks figure out who's who. So, Fu Yao is our nerd. He's one of the demigods. He is our nerd demigod. Nan Fang is the jock. He's, I think, an archer. I got some more pictures I'll have to show y'all later. And then, of course, Shi Lian is our hero. He has the white bandage thing that flies around and chokes people, and that's how he fights. And Hua Chang! bad boy of the novel. Hello, Anime Best. Hello, Akatsuki. Thanks for joining us. So yeah, that's our team. And of course, this adorable little picture is the official art of this arc of the four of them walking through the desert, which is just precious. I love it. So yeah, last time we left off on them finding out about this mysterious desert country that was in the middle of a war, and ever since then, people have been disappearing there, and the heavens haven't done anything. So Shilian's like, well, we gotta check it out. And Hua Chang's like, whatever you want to do, let's go. And the two little demigods are like, we are not leaving you alone with him. We are coming with you. And so now they've come with them. They stopped at a little inn. I think it was abandoned. But the four of them are sitting at a table, and the two demigods are still trying to figure out if, what's his face? Let's see here. Is music playing right now? Let's check this out. Yeah, it says it should loop. Why is it not looping? Hello? Oh my god, why did it go? This setup's not gonna work. I'm gonna have to change it for next time, but for now, we'll go ahead and get started. We were at the table. The jock guy had summoned up his sword and put it on the table and challenged Hua Chang. They're still trying to figure out if he's a demon or not. Trying to prove it. And so he puts this sword on the table, and we're about to find out why this sword is gonna reveal the truth of Hua Chang. And we'll just leave that cute little image since it's the four of them talking anyway. Chapter 20, Part 2. 1,000 miles in a steppe, lost within a sandstorm. The name of the sword was in fact Hong Jin, and it was known to be a treasured sword. Although it could not exorcise ghosts or slay demons, no demons and ghosts could escape its enchanted mirror. Where did my little cheat sheet go? Oh no. Oh, there it is. Okay, good. The demigods know that if they weren't there, that those two would be banging in 5 minutes. You're not wrong. That's almost literally one of the chapters in the later parts of the book, if I remember right. As long as they were not human, once the sword was drawn, the blade would gradually turn red as though infused by blood. Moreover, the blood-red blade would reflect the true appearance of the one who had drawn the sword. Whether they were a fierce ghost or a devastation, no one could escape. Young people always had eyes for precious swords and horses, and would look upon it with particular interest. Precious swords and horses, my two favorite things. San Long let out... Did I say that right? San Long let out an O. Seemingly very fascinated, he said, "Let me see." He held the sword in one hand and grabbed the hilt in the other, then slowly made to pull the sword out. Both Nan Feng and Fu Yao's eyes were glued intensely to his movements. The sword that had been unsheathed 3 inches was dazzling and bright as snow. A moment later, San Long let out a chuckle and said, "Guga, these 2 servants of yours, are they joking with me?" Shilian lightly coughed and turned towards him. "San Long, I've said it before, they're not my servants." Having said that, he turned back again. Nan Feng then spoke in his usual cold tone. "Who do you think is joking with you?" San Long laughed and said, "With a broken sword, how am I supposed to defend myself? With a cat in front of the camera, how am I supposed to read the book?" Bob? Bob, you jealous? Jealous, Bob? Why don't you just sit right here? No. Okay, bye, Bob. Let me make sure that didn't... Okay. With that, he sheathed the sword and tossed it back onto the table. Hearing this, Nan Feng's brow raised in surprise. He abruptly snatched the sword and tore it from its sheath, only to hear a metallic clang. Within his hands, with an extra sharp edge, was a broken sword. Hong Jin's blade was broken 3 inches down from the hilt. Nan Feng's expression slightly shifted before he took the sheath and poured out the remains, triggering a series of clanging noises. What was left within the sheath were the remains of the sword, all shattered into uncountable shards. Hong Jin could distinguish all kinds of demons and ghosts, this much was true. It was never heard of that something could escape its eye, but it was also unheard of that something could cause it to break into pieces within the scabbard. Nan Fang and Fu Yao both pointed at San Lang. "You!" San Lang laughed out loud before leaning backwards with his black boots resting on the table. Taking a shard of Hong Jin, he tossed it about in his hands for fun before saying, "I assume you guys didn't purposefully give me a broken sword to protect myself. It must have broken on the way here. But worry not, I can defend myself without a sword. As for a sword or whatever other things, you should keep it to use for yourself." So in other words, they wanted him to draw the sword to see if he was a ghost, because it's like Bilbo's sword, it glows around ghosts. And he was so powerful, he shattered the sword. Shi Lian was completely unable to look at the sword. To speak of it, this treasured sword, Hong Jing, was originally part of Jun Wu's collection. Remember, Jun Wu's the Heavenly Emperor, and he's big boss guy. After his first ascension, Shi Lian had once gone to the Martial Gods Hall to play and had seen the sword there. He felt that although the sword wasn't very practical to use, it still had its charms. Jun Wu had gifted the sword to him. Afterwards, when he'd fallen, and there had been a time where it was truly too difficult, he couldn't keep muddling through, so he had Feng Xin pawn it off. That's right, pawned. The money received from pawning it had been sufficient enough for the two of them to have a couple good meals, and then there was nothing further to add. During that time, Shi Lian had pawned off far too many things, so he decided it was simply better to forget it all, lest he start remembering from time to time and make his heart bleed. Thinking back, Feng Xin, after his ascension, had probably remembered this sword, and couldn't bear the idea of this rarity from his era being left wandering the mortal realm, which led him to go back down and search for it before he brought it back. He sharpened it, polished it, and placed it in Nanyang Palace, where it was then brought back down again by Nan Fang. All in all, upon seeing the sword, Shi Lian could only feel a dull ache, and had to avert his line of vision. He sensed how the other three were starting to fight again, and thus shook his head before he focused on observing the weather outside. He thought to himself, "Looking at the momentum, I'm afraid there's going to be a sandstorm later. If we were to get back on the road today, it's unknown if we'll be able to find shelter from the wind." At this very moment, outside the building and upon the brilliant golden sand, the shadows of two people suddenly flashed by. Shi Lian immediately sat up. Two silhouettes, one dressed in white and one in black, appeared unhurried, and one could say they looked rather laid back. Yet clouds billowed beneath their feet, indicating their speed. The one in black was tall and lean, while the one in white was a female official with a long sword on her back, and a hosu resting in the crook of her arm. Let's see, what is a hosu? It doesn't have a little marker on it. A short staff of wood or bamboo with bundled hair or hemp wielded by a Buddhist priest. So it's like a fighting stick. The man in black did not turn around, but the female official in white turned back to give them a smile as they flashed past the small building. The smile was as fleeting as their silhouettes. For no reason, it overflowed with a treacherous and strange feeling. Shi Lian kept his gaze fixed outside, which was how he witnessed that particular scene. Within the small building, the other three were only able to catch an approximate glimpse of the silhouettes. As for everything else, they couldn't afford to take note of the details for the time being. Nan Fang suddenly got up and said, "Who are those people?" Shi Lian also stood up and said, "I don't know, but they can't be ordinary people." He muttered to himself for a few moments before saying, "You guys should stop playing around. The wind looks like it's getting stronger to me. Let's hurry and get back on the road. However much distance we cover is still distance covered." Fortunately, although these people were at times like bewildered flying chickens or scared jumping dogs, when it came down to actual business, they were able to collect themselves and get things done. You know how it is when you work with bewildered flying chickens. Presently, they stopped clashing with one another, cleaned up the shards of Hong Jin, and left the small building. For some time, the four of them walked head-on against the wind, and during this time, they walked for approximately 4 hours. But the distance they covered this time could not be compared to the 4 hours they had covered from before. The sandstorm was much stronger. The gales, bundled with sand, pelted down on them, causing exposed skin on their faces and arms to ache dully. The more they walked, the more arduous it felt. With the sound of the wind rushing by their ears and the ever-omnipresent yellow sand making their sight unclear, Shi Lian held down his bamboo hat and said, This sandstorm came about very strangely. When there was no reply from anyone for some time, Shilian wondered if they'd fallen behind. He turned his head to look back, but saw that all three of them were still following closely. It seemed like they had not heard him speak. As it turned out, the sandstorm was too strong. The moment one opened their mouth to speak, the sound would be scraped away. Naturally, Nanfang and Fu Yao would not need his concern. They walked steadily against the turbulence, looking murderous. But San Long was always around 5 steps behind him, walking neither too closely nor too slowly. I'm gonna have to add an image here because I want to show y'all this one. I was working on adding imagery to show y'all during these streams today and didn't quite finish. Oh geez, too big, too big, too big! There you go. That's a good one for them talking, especially in the sandstorm. Amidst the yellow, sand-filled sky, the young man's expression remained undisturbed, without a single ripple of emotion as he walked with his hands crossed behind his back. Clad in red from head to toe, with his hair in a bleak, disorderly dance, he appeared as though he felt no effect from the onslaught of the sandstorm. He remained completely unmoved, moreover. Not even his eyes blinked once. Shilian had already been hit by the sand so much his face hurt. Seeing Shanglong this way, with such disregard for himself, truly made him worried. He said, "Watch out for sand getting into your eyes and clothing." He thought about it again and realized even he himself could not make out what he'd said. Shilian then went straight to San Long and helped him secure his clothes and collar. He wrapped him up tightly, preventing the wind and sand from getting in. San Long was surprised. During this time, the other two caught up to them. With the 4 of them in closer proximity, they could finally hear each other. Shilian said, "Everyone be careful. This sandstorm came too suddenly. Something doesn't seem right. I'm afraid it might be of some evil doing." Fu Yao said, "The wind and sand is just stronger than usual. Other than that, what else could it be?" Shilian shook his head and said, "The wind and sand are fine. What I'm afraid of is if something else was added in the sand." Right at this moment, a sudden gale blew off Shilian's bamboo hat. Once it was in the air, the bamboo hat was about to disappear altogether within the infinite yellow sand. Nevertheless, San Long was deft and quick to react. Shooting out his hand, he reached out and caught the bamboo hat that was about to fly into the sky. Then he once again handed the hat back to Shilian. Shilian thanked him and fastened the bamboo hat back on while saying, "It would be best if we could find a place to avoid the storm." Yet Fu Yao did not agree. If there really was something wrong with the storm, then its motive could only be to stop us from advancing. If that's the case, then we have even more reason to keep going. Having heard this, Shilian hadn't even uttered a word when San Long began laughing out loud. Fu Yao raised his head and coldly said, "What are you laughing at?" San Long crossed his arms and snickered. "Deliberately going against people. Does it satisfy you to be so utterly unconventional?" Even before, Shilian had always thought that although this teenager was always smiling, his smile often made it hard for people to distinguish whether it was actually genuine, or whether it was mockery in the guise of compliments. However, this time anyone would be able to tell there wasn't even half an ounce of goodwill in his smile. Fu Yao's expression abruptly turned cold, as Shilian raised a hand and said, "You guys should stop for now. If you have something to say, save it for later. When the wind gets strong, it can become quite frightening." Fu Yao said, "As if it could really blow people into the sky." Shilian replied, "What you said is very possible." Before he'd finished speaking, the few people in front of him suddenly disappeared. In reality, the one who had disappeared wasn't them. It was him. The sandstorm had really bundled him up and swept him up into the sky. Let's see if I have any images that deal with this kind of scene. Unfortunately, the anime and manga are not very far. The anime is not finished. The manhwa is still ongoing. So there's not a lot of, like, canonical images from specific scenes. Oh, but there is one for this one. Let's... I will replace this with this pretty image. This art's lovely, isn't it? The manhwa's art is so great. Katsuki! My curse! Stop it! Alright, also, let's try... What was my buttons? I think that's supposed to turn off. That did not turn off music. Okay, well, I'm gonna just manually do it. Manually. How about this music for the sandstorm? Let me know if it sounds any good or if you can hear anything. Can you hear anything? Why are you like this? There it goes. Okay. Tell me how it sounds. I will have all the rough edges of this fixed next week. I just ran out of time and work took way too long this morning. In reality, the one who had disappeared wasn't them. It was him. The sandstorm had bundled him up and swept him into the sky. It was a tornado. Shilian spun violently in midair. With a wave of his hand, he said, "Ruoi, grab onto something firm and reliable." With a swish, Ruoi flew out. A moment later, Shilian felt the other end of the white silk drop, as if it had wrapped around something. Grabbing it, Shilian finally stabilized himself in midair with great difficulty. When he lowered his head to take a look, he realized that he had actually been brought to a place that was at least 10 zang away from the ground. And that's a measurement. Currently, he was like a kite, one only pulled along by a string with its center tethered to the ground. Within the onslaught of yellow sands, Shilian grabbed Ruoi as he simultaneously strained to make out what he had taken hold of. He looked and looked before he finally made out a shade of red. The other end of Ruoi seemed to be wrapped around the wrist of the teenager in red. He had Ruoi go grab onto something sturdy and stable, but Ruoi had ended up grabbing onto San Long. Something sturdy and stable? Who will support me and love me for my whole life? What? When did we start talking about marriage? I think we all knew that was what was gonna happen, right? Alright, Chapter 21, Part 1. 1,000 miles in a step, lost within a sandstorm. Shilian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He was just about to get Ruoi to try again and grab onto something else when he suddenly felt the white silk go slack around his wrist. Immediately, Shilian was overcome with a sense of dread. The abrupt feeling wasn't because Ruoi had loosened its grip on the other end, but because something worse had occurred. Sure enough, the shade of red from the ground suddenly got a lot closer. It didn't take long before it was within arm's reach. San Long also got drawn into the sandstorm. What do you want to bet he wasn't drawn into it so much as he jumped? Like, oh, there goes my boy! And went right after him. Shilian yelled at him, "Don't panic!" The moment he opened his mouth, he ate another mouthful of sand. With the way things were at the time, he had long become used to eating a mouthful of sand here and there. Although he'd shouted at San Long not to panic, in reality, even he had felt San Long wouldn't panic at all. Sure enough, after the young man had been caught in the air, Ruoi quickly retracted and pulled the two of them closer together. Shilian got a good look at San Long's face. The expression on the boy's face didn't have half an ounce of panic. Almost as if he would be able to read a book even amidst the sandstorm, as long as he was given one. In fact, Shilian began to suspect whether or not San Long had deliberately intended for himself to get rolled up into the air. Ruoi went wounding around their waists a couple times, tying them together. Shilian hugged onto San Long before saying, "Go again! This time don't grab onto a human being!" Thus, Ruoi flew out again. This time, what Ruoi had grabbed onto was Nan Feng and Fu Yao. Shilian felt both mentally and physically exhausted as he told Ruoi, "When I said not to grab onto a human, I didn't mean it to be so literal." "Well, alright then." He shouted downward in their direction. "Nan Feng, Fu Yao, hang on tight! No matter what, you must support us!" Nan Feng and Fu Yao, who were still on the ground below, naturally wanted to support them. The both of them stood their ground, but it was to no avail. The sandstorm was too wild and fierce. Not long after, and to no one's surprise, yet another two shadows got rolled up into the tornado. Now the four of them were all spinning wildly in the air. Between the darkened yellow sky and the dark yellow earth, the tornado was much like an askew sand pillar supporting the heavens. Furthermore, a strip of white silk connected four figures within the sand pillar, all of whom ceaselessly whirled about without rest. The more they spun, the faster they went, and the higher up they flew. To one side, Shilian ate sand like mad, yet on the other he yelled, "How come you're all up here too?" What they saw, aside from sand, was still sand, and what they heard in addition to wind was still wind. With no other choice, they had to yell at each other at the top of their lungs. As he ate sand, Fu Yao spat in contempt. "You'll have to ask this strip of stupid white silk! What's wrong with it?" Shi Lian grasped the stupid white silk with both hands and helplessly said, "Ruoy! Ruoy, all four of us are counting on you now. This time you mustn't grab onto the wrong thing again. Go!" Carrying feelings of forlorn hope with him, Shi Lian once again let one end of Ruoy go. Nanfang yelled, "Don't count on this thing anymore! Think of another plan!" But at this moment, Shi Lian felt the end he was currently holding on suddenly tighten. His spirits immediately lifted as he said, "Wait! Give it another chance! It grabbed onto something!" Fu Yao also shouted, "It better not have looped around a passerby! Better let them go if it did." It came without saying that Shi Lian was also worried about this. He tugged on Ruoy a couple times, but discovered the other end didn't even budge the slightest bit. Only then did Shi Lian's heart relax as he said, "No, not this time! The other end feels very heavy and stable." He then said, "Retract." Going against the frenzied tornado, Ruoy retracted with great speed. The four figures rapidly sped away from the wind pillar. Gradually, amidst the yellow sand in the sky, Shi Lian was able to perceive the black outline of a semicircle below them. Alright, let's... did that do it? There it goes. So am I just reading today or playing a game? We'll play a game too, for sure. I just was trying to get more done before all that, but you know how things go. They never quite go the way you want them to. Always end up doing too much in a day. The outline was massive and was approximately the size of a small temple. In fact, the other end of Ruoy was precisely coiled around such a thing, and only after they got closer to the ground did he finally see it more clearly. The thing was a giant stone. Within a sandstorm of this degree, this piece of stone was like a firm and silent fortress. It was undoubtedly an excellent shelter against the strong winds. During their entire journey there, they definitely had not seen a giant rock like this. Thus, they really could not tell exactly how far the strange tornado had taken them. The moment the four of them reached the ground, they immediately made their way to the other side of the rock that was blocking the wind. Feeling delighted as they took shelter, Shi Lian said, "This is truly a blessing from the heavens." It turned out that the side of the rock that was protected from the wind had a hole. The hole was about 2 doors wide, while the height was slightly shorter than 1, but it was sufficiently large enough for an adult to enter, as long as they bent down and bowed their heads. The entrance wasn't neatly made and was rather crooked. However, it didn't appear like it was formed naturally, so it was more probable someone had carved it out of this artificial entrance. Once Shi Lian entered, he discovered the rock was carved out to be completely hollow. The space within the cave didn't seem to be small, but it was relatively dark. Shi Lian didn't immediately explore the entire place, and instead sat down on an area that was illuminated by the light streaming in from outside. He brushed off the yellow sand on Ruoy before wrapping it around his wrist. Nanfang and Fu Yao were both spitting out sand. Sand had gotten into their mouth, their eyes, their ears, so it was needless to mention the folds within their clothes. Shedding their clothes and giving it a good shake had resulted in a heavy stream of sand and stone. Among the four of them, the one that looked the least affected was still San Long. After he'd bent over and entered the cave, he dusted off a few specks of dust on his red attire, but nothing more. This was done more for show and out of courtesy, with the exception of his hair being slightly disheveled and his ponytail being combed lopsided. His happy attitude didn't seem to have been affected at all. In addition, the lopsided hairstyle was originally combed crooked by Shi Lian. Hence, even if it became more crooked, it didn't really matter. Nanfang wiped his face twice before breaking out in curses. Shi Lian dumped out the sand within his bamboo hat before sighing. "I truly hadn't expected you guys to get blown into the air too. Why didn't you use the 1,000-pound spell?" While spitting sand, Nanfang replied, "We did, but it was ineffective." On one hand, Fu Yao viciously shook his outer robe, while on the other he spat, "Where do you think this is? This is a barren desert in the extreme northwest. It's not like it's my general's domain. To the north is the territory belonging to the second general of the Pei House. To the west is Quan Yizen's territory. Within these few hundred miles, there's no way you'd find even a single Zhuanzhen temple. What he's saying there is he's weak here because his temples aren't here. Nobody's going to be very powerful here because none of them have temples in this desert. It should be noted there was a common saying within the mortal realm: a powerful dragon cannot crush a snake in its old haunts. Therefore, since one of them was an official under the Deputy General of the Southeast Martial God, while the other was an official under the Deputy General of the Southwest Martial God, using spiritual arts on a territory that didn't belong to them would inevitably mean the enchantment would be subjected to restrictions. With their current appearances, Shilian believed the two of them were rather peeved and annoyed by it. It could be assumed that it was their first time being blown into the sky by a gust of strong wind, only to whirl around in circles and be incapable of setting back onto the ground. Shilian said, "Both of you truly worked hard." San Long sat down on the ground next to him. With a hand propped against his cheek, he said, "Let's just stay here and wait for the sandstorm to subside." Let's see if we have any sandstorm pictures. We have some pictures of them laying down next to each other, but I don't want to use all of mine on the first time. I'm gonna have to keep looking for more pics. Shilian turned towards him and said, "Looks like that's our only option for now. As powerful as this tornado may be, it's unlikely that it would also sweep up a rock this big into the sky." San Long said, "But it is just as you said before. This sandstorm is indeed very strange." Shilian suddenly thought of something and said, "San Long, I have a question." San Long replied, "Ask away." Shilian said, "That Banyu Grand Tutor, are they male or female?" San Long replied, "Have I not mentioned this yet? Female." Okay, jumping back. Remember there was a story about this region and how they fell into a war and what was going on there. Part of the war was centered around the Banyu Tutor. I don't remember exactly what the tutor was, but basically that's a character who was involved in this war in the past that led to this area becoming a desert. And Shilian asked if it was male or female. It's female. He says, Shilian thought as expected and said, "When we were resting in the abandoned small inn, didn't we see two figures walk by the front? Their steps were graceful yet odd. They definitely couldn't have been mortals. And the one in white had been a female official." Fu Yao was skeptical and said, "It is hard to distinguish whether or not they were male or female by looking at their robes. The figure was taller than the average woman. Did you truly see them clearly?" Shilian said, "I saw it clearly, there's no mistake. So I've been thinking, could she have been the Banyu Tutor?" Nanfang then said, "It's possible, but there was a person wearing black by her side. Who could that have been?" Shilian said, "That's difficult to say. However, that person was walking faster than her, so his abilities definitely wouldn't be beneath hers." Fu Yao said, "Is there a possibility they were the two demonic cultivators' other member, the Grand Tutor Fang Jin?" Shilian said, "As for this, I think the reason why they're called the two demonic cultivators is probably because even numbers are easier to remember. Much like how in the ghost realm there are 4 calamities. Even though there aren't 4 in reality, people went out of their way to gather 4 anyways." Hearing this, San Long laughed out loud again. When Shilian looked at him, San Long said, "It's nothing. I just thought that what you said is very reasonable. After all, one of the 4 calamities is indeed just there to make it an even number." Remember that Huan Chang is one of the 4 calamities, and he's laughing about one of his number not being worthy of the title. Shilian continued talking. "As a matter of fact, they probably have nothing to do with one another. I've heard a bit about this Grand Tutor. They were Yong'an Kingdom's royal tutor. There's at least 100 years interval between their appearance and the Banyu Grand Tutor's arrival." Fu Yao found this to be unreasonable and said, "You didn't know the 4 calamities of the ghost realm, yet you know of Grand Tutor Fang Jin from the Yong'an Kingdom in the mortal realm?" Shilian said, "Sometimes when I'm passing by places as I collect scraps, I'll learn a few things. And it's not like I collect scraps in the ghost realm, so of course I wouldn't have known about them." At this moment, the sound of the wind from outside the cave had become a bit weaker. Standing slightly outside, Nanfang hit the rock a few times to examine the material. After concentrating for a while, he bowed his head and said, "Why would this rock get a hole this size dug out of it?" He probably thought it was suspicious to see a rock like this here. However, this didn't seem too strange to Zilian, who said, "A hole dug out of the rock like this isn't uncommon. The past people of the Banyu Kingdom, those who needed shelter from a sandstorm, like the ones who'd been herding livestock and couldn't make it home in time, or those who needed temporary places to stay the night, would dig a hole in the rock like this. Some of these holes were not carved, but were blown out with explosives. Unconvinced, Nan Fang said, "How would you even herd livestock in the desert?" Shi Lian said, 200 years ago, this wasn't a desert. Instead, it was like an oasis. Bye, Phil. Thanks for joining us. Hope to see you later. At this moment, San Long said, "Guga." Shi Lian turned his head to ask, "What's wrong?" San Long pointed his finger and said, "The rock you're sitting on seems to have something written on it." What? Shi Lian lowered his head first before he got up. Only then did he discover that the place he was sitting on was a stone slate. Sure enough, after wiping off the dust, there were indeed words written on the slate. However, they were engraved relatively faintly, so the words weren't very visible. Half the slate was still buried within the sand. The writing extended upwards from the ground, while fading into the darkness. Since there were characters written there, they definitely had to take a look. Shi Lian said, "I'm low on spiritual power. Could one of you cast palm flame and help me illuminate the area? Many thanks." Nan Fang snapped his fingers. Instantly, a flame appeared atop his palm. Shi Lian unintentionally glanced at San Long, who didn't seem surprised at the sight. After all, the boy had already witnessed the shrink 1,000 miles array. Shi Lian felt that no matter what either side revealed to each other in the future, no one would be surprised. Nan Fang moved his hand to the place Shi Lian pointed at, and the fire illuminated the words engraved on the slate. The words were very strange, as if they were drawn randomly in scribbles casually scrawled by children. They were even slightly tilted. Nan Fang asked, "What's written here?" San Long said, "Naturally, they're the characters of the Ban Yu kingdom." Shi Lian replied, "I'm afraid Nan Fang was asking about the meaning behind the words. Let me take a look." Cleaning the sand off the slate, Shi Lian reached the top row. Several of the characters here were especially large and appeared to be the title or subject. In addition, the symbols there seemed to repeat many times throughout the rest of the text. Beside them, Fu Yao also called forth some light onto his palm before he asked, "You can read Ban Yu text?" Shi Lian said, "In all honesty, before the Ban Yu demonic cultivator appeared, I collected scraps in the Ban Yu kingdom." "Is something the matter?" "Nothing. I was just curious as to how many other places you've collected scraps from." Shi Lian smiled before he bowed his head to continue reading. Suddenly he said a single word. "General." Nan Fang and Fu Yao both spoke at the same time. What? Chapter 21, Part 2. Shi Lian lifted his head and said, "I said what's written at the very top of the slate is the word general." He paused before continuing. "There's another character written after general. However, I'm not too certain as to what the last character means." Nan Fang seemed to have let out a breath before he said, "Continue to examine them then." The moment Shi Lian nodded his head, Nan Fang held up that ball of palm flame. Once again, his hand slightly shifted forward, but with the adjustment, Shi Lian suddenly felt there was something off. In his peripheral vision, there was something there that hadn't been there before. Shi Lian pressed both of his hands to the slate full of engraved characters before he slowly raised his head, only to see, amidst the darkness and superjacent to the slate, a rigid human face illuminated by the faint light of the flame. The face, with both eyeballs looking downwards, was currently staring straight at him. Ah! The one who screamed wasn't them, but the rigid human face. Another palm flame became lit in Nan Fang's other hand. Then the flames upon both of his palms abruptly leapt upwards, reaching great heights. They finally illuminated the interior of the cave in its entirety. Just now, what the light of the flame had revealed was someone who'd always been hidden in the dark. At this moment, they frantically crawled away to one side of the cave in retreat, withdrawing to the very edges of the depths. Unexpectedly, there was already a group of 7 or 8 people there, all huddled together, trembling. Nan Fang shouted loudly, "Who are you people?" The shout reverberated throughout the cave, making the entire place vibrate. Both of Shi Lian's ears were already faintly pained from the ringing caused by the scream earlier. At this point, he had no choice but to cover his ears. The sandstorm from before had been too strong, and the noise pollution had smothered their ears. Now they struggled to hear each other even when they spoke at a volume just slightly lower than usual. In addition, after entering the cave, they'd begun their heated discussion on the topic of the Banyu tutor. Later, they became very focused on deciphering the text on the stone slate. As a result, they didn't sense there were other people in the cave the whole time, people who hadn't made a single noise. The 7 or 8 people were all shivering. After quite a while, an old man around 50 years or so in age spoke up. "We are a group of ordinary merchants passing through this area. The sandstorm was too strong and we couldn't keep going, so we ended up taking shelter here." Within the group of people, he appeared to be the most composed and seemed to be their leader. Nanfang then said, "As ordinary merchants just passing by, why were you all acting so furtive and hid yourselves here?" That old man was about to say something when the young man, who looked about 17 or 18 years old, standing beside him, loudly exclaimed, "We originally weren't acting in a furtive manner until you guys suddenly burst inside. Who knew if you were good or bad? Afterwards, we heard you mention something about a Banyu Grand Tutor and something about a ghost realm. Your palm was able to light fire from thin air. We all thought you were those soldiers who come out to patrol and catch people to eat. How could we dare make a sound?" The old man appeared to be afraid the young man's words came off as too provoking and would anger the other party. He said, "Tiansheng, stop speaking nonsense." The young man had thick eyebrows and large eyes, and was born with a strong and dignified appearance. When he got told off by his elder, he immediately stopped talking. Shilian's ears had finally stopped hurting, so he put down his hands. In an amicable manner, he said, "A misunderstanding. This is a misunderstanding. Everyone, there's no need to be nervous. You can all relax a bit." After pausing for a moment, he continued, "We're not Banyu soldiers. My humble self is a master of a monastery, and my companions are people from my monastery. They study the arts of divination. You are all ordinary merchants, but we're just ordinary Taoists. We mean no harm. Similarly, we wanted shelter from the wind and just happened to enter the same cave. That's all." His tone was warm and gentle, while his way of speech was slow. Hence, he was able to reassure everyone's emotions. After repeatedly explaining and making guarantees, the expression of the group of merchants finally eased. But who would have thought that San Lang would finally laugh before saying, "From what I see, these merchants can't be ordinary people. They're just being modest." Puzzled, everyone glanced in his direction. San Lang continued, "When it comes to Banyu Pass, was it not, with every passing, half the party goes missing? Despite being fully aware of the rumor, you decided to pass through here. This can be considered as rather courageous. How can you depict them as ordinary?" Having heard this, the old man replied, "Young man, that is not always the case. In reality, rumors are exaggerated, and there have been many merchants who pass through in peace." San Lang said, "Oh?" The old man said, "It's fine as long as you find the right person to lead the way, and don't end up accidentally straying into the former Banyu kingdom. Thus, this time, to pass through here, we specially found a local to lead the way." The young man named Tiansheng said, "That's right, it all depends on the leader. Us getting to this point is thanks to Azao Ge. So his name is Zhao. Zhao is, you put an A in the front to indicate that you're close friends or family or that kind of thing. And G at the end. So it would really be Ge. That's big brother, Guga, or just Ge at the end of a name. So in other words, he's really fond of this guy. Calls him Azao Ge. He helped us avoid so many quicksands. In addition, he had seen the wind pick up earlier and immediately took us to find shelter. Otherwise, we would have been buried alive by now." Shilian took a look. The one named Zhao, who had led their group, looked extremely young. He looked to be in his 20s and was born with a sincere, honest, and handsome face. Appearing to be someone quiet and slow to speak, he didn't react much when everyone praised him and only spoke in a stuffy tone. "This is nothing. It's all part of my responsibilities. I hope that when the wind dies down, everyone's camels and goods will remain unscathed. They'll definitely be all right." These merchants' attitudes seemed very optimistic. Yet Shilian couldn't help but feel things weren't as simple as they thought. If one doesn't stray into the Banyu kingdom, there are no problems. If that was the case, did the half the party go missing caravans in the past all refer to people who didn't believe this ruse and were determined to send themselves off to die? He thought for a bit before he whispered to Nanfang and Fu Yao. This situation occurred quite suddenly. However, when the sandstorm passes, let's first ensure these people leave safely before we head on over to the former territories of Banyu to investigate. Good night, Odd Molly. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you next time. Then, Shilian once again lowered his head and continued examining the engraved words on the stone slate. He'd previously recognized the characters for general, but that was only because this word could be considered as one commonly used. His stay in Banyu Kingdom was an event that happened 200 years ago. Even if he had been fluent in the language back then, after 200 years, everything would have been completely forgotten. Now, having to suddenly pick it up again, he truly required some time and patience. At this moment, San Lang, who was standing beside him, said, "General's Mound." As soon as he said this, Shilian remembered. The last character, did it not have the meaning of mound, grave, or tomb? Turning his head, Shilian asked in surprise, "San Lang, could it be that you also understand the ancient text of Banyu?" San Lang knows something? He has knowledge? Amazing! I can't believe he knows something nobody else does. It's never happened. San Lang chuckled and said, "Not much. It was just a hobby, so I only know a few words." Shilian was already used to him replying this way. Banyu texts were quite limited, and those who understood it were hard to come by. The word mound wasn't commonly used either. If it was truly as San Lang claimed, and he only knew a few words, how could it coincidentally be precisely this one? He said not much, but Shilian was afraid the meaning of his words was more equivalent to, "Ask as much as you like, it won't intimidate me." Immediately, Shilian replied with a smile, "This is good. Maybe the few words you know are the ones I don't. Come here, let's look at this together." He gently beckoned him, so San Lang went over. Nanfang and Fu Yao stood to the side while holding up their palm flames to illuminate the area. Shilian's fingers slowly brushed over each character on the tombstone. Together with San Lang, they discussed in hushed voices as they quietly continued reading. As they read along, their gazes grew more and more peculiar by the second, until they finally turned solemn. The young man named Tiansheng from the group of merchants was relatively young, and young people were always full of curiosity. Moreover, having previously exchanged a few lines with the other party, he henceforth considered them to be familiar with each other. Thus, Tiansheng asked, "Fellows, what exactly is written on the tombstone?" Shilian came back to his senses and replied, "This slate is a monument, and what's written on the monument is a general's life story." Tiansheng said, "Is he a general from the Banyu Kingdom?" San Lang replied, "No, he's a general from the Central Plains." Suspicious, Nanfang responded, "A general from the Central Plains? Then why would the people of the Banyu Kingdom give him a proper mound? Aren't the two kingdoms constantly at war with one another?" San Lang said, "This particular general was peculiar. Although the slate called him a general, in reality he was merely a famous military officer." "Then he was promoted to general afterwards?" "Not at all. In fact, he began commanding 100 people. After that, he led 70, and then after that, only 50. In short, he kept getting demoted." To be demoted again and again, to the point one couldn't be demoted any further. This kind of experience honestly felt too familiar. Shilian felt two gazes collectively fall on his body, but he pretended not to notice, and continued reading the text on the stone slate. At this moment, he heard Tiansheng ask with incomprehension, "How can there be an official who becomes lower and lower ranked? As long as you don't make any big blunders, even if you don't get promoted, you wouldn't get demoted. How much do you have to fail to get to this point?" Tightening his hand into a fist, Shilian lifted it to the front of his mouth and gently coughed. "Young friend, an officer who continues to get demoted isn't something uncommon." "Ah?" San Lang laughed and said, "That's right, it's quite common." After a pause, he continued, "The reason why this particular military officer kept getting demoted wasn't because he was incompetent or unsuited for his duties, but because the relationship between the two kingdoms was very bad. Yet when he was on the battlefield, not only did he not bring back any achievements, he also repeatedly became a hindrance." Nanfang said, "What do you mean by hindrance?" San Lang replied, Not only did he try to stop the Banyu soldiers from killing innocent people from his own country, he also stopped his own soldiers from killing the innocents of Banyu Kingdom. Every time he acts to stop innocents from being slaughtered, he gets demoted once. His laid-back manner made the 7 or 8 merchants slowly huddle together as if they were listening to him tell a story. They seemed fairly invested, and they also expressed their opinions as they listened. Tian Shang said, "I feel like this military official isn't wrong. It's what it is when soldiers fight each other in battle, but for not letting them kill random innocents, isn't that okay? Although this is something foolishly kind for a soldier of his kingdom and not exactly suitable, in general there's nothing wrong. Yeah, after all, he's saving people, not harming them." Shi Lian heard this and faintly smiled. The group of merchants in front of him were neither the people living at the border, nor were they the people from 200 years ago. Nowadays, since Banyu Kingdom had already been annihilated, people would naturally play down the matter when they mentioned it. They would be compassionate and even give a few words of praise. And even if one didn't agree with something that had happened, they would probably understand why it had been done. But when it had happened 100 years ago, with both sides in the flames of war, when hatred took no breaks, the consequences of the aforementioned behavior would definitely not be lightly evaluated as foolishly kind. Within the group, only Azao was a local. It was probably because of this he was able to understand it better. He said, "Nowadays is nowadays. 200 years ago was 200 years ago. The fact this military official merely got demoted meant he was very lucky." Fu Yao sneered before saying, "How ridiculous." Shi Lian could pretty much guess what he was about to say. Thus, he gently massaged the space between his eyebrows. Sure enough, under the flame that illuminated Fu Yao's gloomy appearance, he said, "Someone in his position should seek to do his duty. Since this person became a soldier, he should remember to defend his own kingdom. When dauntlessly fighting enemies on the front line with 2 kingdoms at war, it's inevitable to kill. Being this soft-hearted would only cause his comrades to loathe him. Moreover, enemy soldiers would find him comical and ridiculous. There wouldn't be anyone who would feel grateful." His words were very reasonable, and the cave fell silent. Then Fu Yao said in a faint tone, "In the very end, there's only one ending for people like that. Death, and most likely at the hands of his own people." Having remained quiet for some time, Shi Lian broke the silence and said, "Yes, you're quite right. He died." Hey, Cygnus, welcome. We just finished chapter whatever that was. I think the chapter 21 is just especially long, so we're now on chapter 21, part 3. I think this will be the last bit because my voice is a little sore. We're almost at an hour, so we'll read this chapter and we'll call it. Shocked, Tian Shang exclaimed, "How did he die? Did he really get killed by his own people?" Shi Lian mulled over this for a moment, but decided to say it. "That's not entirely it. On the slate it says, during one battle, while both parties were busy fighting one another, this man hadn't laced his boot laces properly and stepped onto his own laces. He tripped and fell, and then..." Everyone in the cave originally thought this general must have died in an uncomparably tragic yet moving manner. Thus, having heard what was said, they were all taken aback. They thought to themselves, "What kind of death is this?" before laughter broke out among them. Shi Lian. So he was trampled and slashed to death by both enemy and friend, whose eyes were glazed crimson from murder. San Lang raised an eyebrow and said, "Is it that funny?" Shi Lian also added, "That's right, it's rather tragic. Everyone, let's show some sympathy and not laugh. Especially since we're in front of his tombstone. We should give him some face." Tian Shang hurriedly said, "I don't mean any harm, but this is still a little..." Shi Lian felt helpless, because when he had read up to this part, he'd also wanted to laugh a little. However, he decided to not bring that up. He continued to translate and read out loud. In short, although the military official had a bad reputation within the army, the citizens near the border of Banyu and the people from the Central Plains, who had been somewhat under his care, started to call him general. They built him a simple mound here and set up a tombstone to commemorate him. San Long added, afterwards, the people of Banyu Kingdom discovered a miraculous part to the tombstone. As long as you kowtow in front of this stone slate 3 times, you'd be able to turn an inauspicious start to a good blessing in the desert. His tone was really too enigmatic and unfathomable, which easily led people to believe him. The expression on his face was also deadly earnest. When people heard this, quite a few immediately started to kowtow. That means to, like, get on your knees and you bow all the way with your hands. It's being very, very respectful. It was better to believe it existed than for it to not. However, Shilian found this baffling and said, "Is there really a sentence that says that? How wondrous!" San Long faintly smiled before he whispered, "No, I made that up. Since they laughed at him before, making them kowtow to him now isn't asking too much, right?" Shilian looked and saw it was true. There was already no more text left to translate on the stone slate. He originally wanted to sigh, but now he found it funny. Thus he whispered, "Why are you so cheeky?" San Long stuck out his tongue. The two of them were laughing when suddenly someone screamed. Oh, what a cute scene. And it ends with someone screaming in terror. But how adorable is that? He could tell that it was upsetting Shilian, so he was like, "Alright, I'll make you guys respect him." And he just lied. You gotta bow to the guy that you just laughed at. And then, of course, he's like, "You're so cheeky," and he just sticks his tongue out at him. It's such a cute little scene. I can't wait to see it in the manga. Oh my god. I think the manga stopped just before where we are right now. At least the translation I've found, I think, ends right when they are headed to the desert, which stinks. San Long... Okay, wait. The one shout resounded sharply within the cave. Noise vibrating, it made people feel their hair stand on end. Shilian looked towards the direction where the shout had come from and asked, "What's wrong?" Someone shouted, "Snake!" Nanfang and Fu Yao both moved their hands in that direction. The 2 palm flames illuminated the spot of the ground from afar. Shockingly, a long and gorgeously colored snake slithered upon the sandy soil. Everyone panicked. How could there be snakes? Why doesn't this snake make even the slightest bit of sound? It's impossible to tell where it crawled in. When the snake was illuminated by the flames, its body rose. It appeared to be extremely vigilant and seemed as if it was ready to attack at any moment. Nanfang was about to strike with a palm flame when he noticed someone slowly making their way toward it. The person casually caught it and soon had the entire 7 inches of the snake's body pinched within their grasp. Lifting their left hand, they brought it to the front of their eyes and observed it while saying, "Aren't snakes in the desert something common?" Someone with this kind of unscrupulous attitude could only be San Long. This was the so-called saying, "Hit them where it hurts." If all 7 inches of the snake was pinched to death, regardless of how poisonous its fangs may be, it would have been powerless. The tail of the snake weakly wrapped around San Long's left arm a few times. At this moment, the distance between San Long and Shilian shortened, and thus Shilian got a good look at the snake. Its skin appeared to be half translucent, and one could see wispy strands of black mixed within a bright, purplish-red color. The color made people associate it with that of internal organs, which rendered feelings of uneasiness. Moreover, the tail of the snake was actually the color of flesh and sectioned off as if it had layers of hard shell. In fact, the tail didn't resemble that of a snake's, but more of a scorpion's. Having seen it clearly, Shilian's expression abruptly changed before he exclaimed, "Watch out for its tail!" He barely finished speaking when the tail wrapped around San Long's arm suddenly loosened its grip. The tip of the tail seemed to have become another snake head. After snapping backwards, it suddenly thrust out. The tail stab came abruptly, yet San Long casually reached out with his right arm and caught the tail with ease. He pinched the tail as if he was holding something entertaining, before he showed it to Shilian. Laughing, San Long said, "This tail's rather amusing." Shilian saw the pointy end of the snake's tail actually sprouted a sharp and fleshy red thorn. Letting out a breath, he said, "Good thing it didn't stab you, as expected. This is a scorpion-tailed snake." Aren't you glad we don't have such things as scorpion-tailed snakes? Nanfang and Fu Yao also came over to look at the snake. They asked, "Scorpion-tailed snake?" Shilian replied, "That's right. It's a unique poisonous animal exclusive to Banyu Kingdom, and they're quite rare in numbers. I've never seen one before, but I've heard of it. With a body of a snake and a tail like a scorpion, the poison's more toxic than the two combined. Regardless of whether one was bitten by poisonous fangs or stabbed by the tail, they will all... After speaking to that point, Shilian saw San Lang begin tormenting the snake wrapped around his hands by turning it about repeatedly. He would sometimes stretch it, sometimes squish it, sometimes wring it out like a towel. By now, San Lang was only a step away from tying it into a bow. After a moment of speechlessness, Shilian softly persuaded, San Lang, stop playing with it. It's very dangerous. However, San Lang laughed and said, That's okay. There's no reason for Gaga to worry. These scorpion-tailed snakes are the Banyu Grand Tutor's totem. Opportunities like these are rare, so of course I have to carefully examine it. Oh yeah, examine it. Yeah, you're examining the snake. Shilian gave a slight start and said, The Banyu Grand Tutor's totem? San Lang replied, That's right. It was said that it was precisely because the Banyu Grand Tutor could control these scorpion-tailed snakes for the people of Banyu to think her powers were boundless. This was why they worshipped her as the Grand Tutor. The moment he heard the word control, Shilian felt something was off. He thought to himself, Speaking of control, the scorpion-tailed snakes always move in a herd, one that could cover a large expanse of ground. Immediately, Shilian said, Everyone should make haste and get out of here first. I'm afraid there isn't just a single scorpion-tailed snake here. He hadn't even finished his sentence when he heard a scream. One after another, several people began screaming in fear. Snakes! So many snakes! Over here too! In the midst of the darkness, 7 or 8 purplish-red scorpion-tailed snakes silently slithered out. Scorpion-tailed snakes silently slithered out. That's fun to say. They emerged extremely abruptly, so it was absolutely impossible to tell which hole they'd crawled out from. In addition, they didn't attack, instead just stared silently at the group of people, as if examining what they were. The snakes' slithering and attacks were all soundless, and they didn't even have the hissing sounds a normal snake made when it flicked its tongue. They were extremely dangerous. Nanfang and Fuyao's palm flame shut out at the same time, causing a massive ball of fire to explode within the cave. Shilian yelled, Get out! No one dared to stay in the cave for any longer, and all but frantically fled outside. Fortunately, the sky reflected the beginning of a sunset, and the tornado had long gone away. The sandstorm had also died down significantly. The group of people evacuated toward an open area. As they ran and ran, someone said, That tombstone's really frightening. How is it that we kowtowed 3 times in front of it, yet we still encountered something like this, despite all of that? Shilian thought it was a good thing. They didn't know the last part had been entirely made up by Satlong. But then he also heard someone else say, Yeah, the results are the same as worshipping that rubbish immortal. The more you worship, the unluckier you become. Uh-oh. I wonder who they're talking about. For an arrow to hit the bullseye, despite being in a place so distant and unrelated, Shilian was left with no words. Suddenly, Tiansheng shouted in fear, Uncle Zeng! The elderly man he'd been supporting collapsed. Shilian rushed over and asked, What happened? The expression on Uncle Zhang's face was filled with pain and suffering. He raised a trembling hand which Shilian caught to take a look at. Immediately his heart sank when he saw a purplish-red color appearing between the elderly man's thumb and forefinger, and even the bump from the swelling was already very big. Around the swollen area one could with some difficulty make out a tiny hole. For such a tiny wound one could surmise it wouldn't be noticed within a short period of time. Shilian immediately said, Everyone, check if there are any wounds on your body. If there are, tie off the part with some string to prevent the poison from spreading. He flipped over the man's wrist to check his meridian, but saw a purplish-red strip visible to the naked eye crawling up his arm. A meridian's like a spiritual energy point, like a I don't know, chakra point. It's a fancy spiritual thing. Shilian mentally thought the snake's poison was incredibly potent and was about to untie Ruoi, only to see Aizao rip off a piece of cloth to tie around the middle of the old man's forearm. It was tied extremely tightly, preventing the poisoned blood from flowing back into the heart. His movement was also incomparably fast, something Shilian internally praised. Shilian lifted his head. Without having to say anything, Nanfang had already taken out a medicinal bottle and poured out a pill. After Shilian made the old man swallow, Tiansheng frantically shouted, Uncle, are you alright? Aizao Uncle won't die, right? Aizao shook his head and said, If you've been bitten by the snake, within 4 hours, death is inevitable. Stunned, Tiansheng said, "Then what can we do?" Uncle Zhang was the leader of the merchant caravan. Many of the merchants were also anxious and asked, "Didn't this young friend just give him some medicine?" Nanfang said, "What I gave him wasn't the antidote, and it'll only temporarily prolong his life. It'll help keep him alive and extend the 4 hours to 24. All the merchants felt agitated at the loss. 24 hours? If you say it like that, doesn't that mean he has no other choice but to wait for death? Is this poison incurable? At this moment, San Long made his way over and said, "There's hope." One after another, everyone looked at him. Overcome with happiness, Tiansheng turned his head around to say, "Zhaoge, if he can be saved, why didn't you say anything earlier? You scared me to death." However, Azao did not reply, and only silently shook his head. San Long said, "Of course it'd be difficult for him to say. If those who were poisoned could be saved, but others might lose their lives as a result, how could one explain this?" Xilian asked, "San Long, what do you mean?" San Long replied, "Gege, do you know the legend of the scorpion-tailed snake?" It turned out, legend has it, hundreds of years ago in Banyu Kingdom there had been an emperor. He went deep within the mountains to hunt and inadvertently caught 2 sinister spirits whose true forms were that of poisonous creatures. One was a viper spirit and the other was a scorpion. These 2 poisonous beings cultivated deep within the mountains. They paid no attention to the affairs of the world and had never harmed anyone. However, the Emperor of Banyu Kingdom wanted them dead because they were poisonous creatures, and were thus bound to harm others sooner or later, so the Emperor wanted to kill them first. The 2 spirits pleaded for the Emperor to spare them a single way to survive, but the Emperor was a ruthless man. During a banquet, he forced the spirits to mate in front of an audience of ministers as a means of entertainment, while the Emperor himself and his ministers drank to their heart's content. I totally forgot about that. Dude's fucked. After the banquet ended, the Emperor still had them killed. Only the Empress couldn't bear for this to happen, but she didn't dare disobey the Emperor either. In the end, she only picked up a scented leaf and tossed it over, covering their corpses. The poisonous viper and scorpion turned into evil spirits full of resentment. They cursed their descendants born after their forced intercourse to remain there forever and kill the people of Banyu Kingdom. Therefore, the scorpion-tailed snakes appeared exclusively within Banyu Kingdom. Once bitten or stung, the poison moved quickly and violently, and one's death would be miserable. However, because of the Empress's benevolent action that night, the scented leaf she had tossed over to cover their dead bodies became the antidote to their poison. After he finished explaining, San Long said, "That particular scented leaf is from a plant called the kindred moon herb. It only grows within the borders of the Banyu Kingdom." After hearing this, the merchants began talking, one after another. This kind of legend, can it really be trusted? This young friend, someone's life is on the line. You shouldn't be joking with us now. However, San Long only smiled and didn't say anything. After telling this to Xilian, he didn't say much afterwards. Seeking proof, Tiansheng turned to face Azao and said, "Zhaoge, are the things the red-clothed Gege said true?" After muttering to himself for a moment, Azao said, "It's uncertain whether or not the legends are genuine or fake. However, within the kingdom, the kindred moon herb does exist, and this plant can indeed cure the poison of the scorpion-tailed snakes." Xilian said, "In other words, there's a single way to survive for those who are bitten, yet this one glimmer of hope can only be obtained within Banyu Kingdom." No wonder there were so many passing merchant caravans and travelers who were fully aware of the saying, "With every passing, half the party goes missing," but would still enter the former Banyu Kingdom. It was not because they were determined to send themselves off to death. Rather, perhaps, if they didn't enter the kingdom, they would just meet certain death. So in other words, the reason everyone keeps going in this kingdom is because they got bit by the snakes and were like, "Ah, fuck, I need ointment!" The scorpion-tailed snakes were the Banyu demonic cultivator's totem and thus could be controlled by her. In that case, the appearance of these snakes could not be a coincidence. Relying on how few heavenly officials here could not guarantee the safety of all the people currently present, they also did not know whether or not more snakes would appear. Hence, Xilian lifted 2 fingers to his temple and tried to enter the spirit communication array. He wanted to see if it was possible to thicken his skin and borrow a few more of little officials. In other words, he wants to ask for help. But who knew his attempt to enter the array was completely unsuccessful. He lowered his hand and felt it was odd. Shilian thought to himself, I shouldn't have used all my energy that quickly. I calculated it this morning. I should have some left. He immediately turned towards Nanfang and Fu Yao before saying, Could either of you try to enter the array? I can't enter it from my end. After a moment, the two gods' expressions became very solemn. Nanfang said, I can't enter it either. In places with extremely strong evil auras, part of a heavenly official's spiritual array could be affected, temporarily weakening or perhaps even blocking. Shilian was afraid that right now they had encountered a predicament with precisely that. Shilian paced back and forth for a while before he lifted his head and said, It might be because this place is too close to the former Banyu kingdom, so the spirit array is blocked. At this moment, he suddenly glimpsed an exceptionally dazzling smear of red in the corner of his eye. On one side, Nanfang and Fu Yao were still trying to enter the spirit array, while the other merchants were all busy checking their bodies for wounds. Only the young man Tiansheng was solely preoccupied with holding on to old man Zhang and worrying. He did not notice the purplish-red scorpion-tailed snake that had silently crawled up his back. And yet when the scorpion-tailed snake curled at Tiansheng's shoulder, what its fangs were aimed at wasn't the young man's neck, but the arm of the nonchalant San Lang standing to the side. The snake leaned back and shot forward. Right before the fangs pierced San Lang's arm, Shilian flung out his hand before he incomparably, accurately grasped all 7 inches of the scorpion-tailed snake. With the strength of his hand alone, he could have choked the snake to the point of all its organs exploding, bursting out in a splatter of guts and brain. However, Shilian wasn't sure whether or not the blood and flesh of the snake was toxic, and he didn't want to risk making the wrong move. He was just about to grab onto the tail, but who knew the snake's body would be so slippery, making it difficult to grab onto. Although Shilian went to pinch it, he felt something ice-cold, round, and soft slip through his fingers, and the very next moment, Shilian felt a sharp pain, like the prick of a needle, on the back of his hand. Dun dun dun! That's where we'll stop for today. Thank you so much for joining me. Hopefully the kinks in this new setup will be fixed by next week. I gotta figure out some better hotkeys and stuff and get some more images and things, but thank you for joining me. We will continue with the adventure through the sandstorm and the snakes and the horrible desert next Monday. I'll be playing Haunting Ground in a bit, probably 5-ish, because I gotta eat something. And, yeah. Tomorrow's another hangout day. We're gonna have a session of playing games and watching TV and stuff over on Discord if you want to hang out with us. If you like what I do and you want to support it, check the description for links to Patreon, Coffee, all that kind of stuff. We have an editor now officially. I got to see the new Silent Hill video today. It was very good. It's almost done. If you want to help support that and make sure new stuff comes out, you can do that and get lots of bonus content too. So yeah, I think that's everything right now. So I will see you guys next time, and thanks again for watching. Bye.